Hi, everybody, and welcome to Open Matters. I'm your host, Guy Martin, the Executive Director of OASIS Open, and this is the second installment in our ongoing series of shows dedicated to exploring the interplay between open standards and open source, and the communities that power them. This forum is designed to showcase great discussions, debates, and collaborations as we work to unify the whole open development ecosystem. And if you're interested in automating business processes across companies with blockchain, you're going to be very interested in what today's guest, John Wolpert, has to say. John helped co-found the Baseline Protocol project here at OASIS and was one of the first community members here to reach out and welcome me in my new role and share his insights on the mixture of open source and open standards. Hi, John. Thanks for being here.
Hey, Guy, can you hear me?
Yeah, great, John. So before we dive in, I'd like to ask you to briefly introduce yourself to our audience.
Hi, I'm John Wolpert, and I work on the OASIS, Ethereum OASIS Baseline Protocol initiative, which is an open standards, open source project, and we'll talk about that more soon. Before that, I was at, right now I'm the executive in charge of mainnet ecosystems and for the blockchain for consensus. And before that, I was at IBM and I helped found IBM Blockchain and Hyperledger Fabric.
Awesome. Thanks, John. So before we get started, everybody, some quick housekeeping. Questions will be held until the end, and attendees may raise their hand to ask their question live, or if you prefer, you can insert it into the Q&A box. And one more quick reminder that this session is being recorded for later playback. So with that, let's get started. So John, you hinted at it earlier, and I know as an engineer, it's hard to describe your baby in just a few words, but can you explain what Baseline is and why it's important?
Well, the Baseline protocol, and we often refer to it as baselining, and I'll explain why, is really kind of interestingly boring. It is a framework, a methodology, a technique. That's why we call it a protocol, because it used to be that when we called something a protocol, it was a protocol and a technique, not what often people are calling a protocol now, like a chain or a platform or some kind. This is a protocol. It is a technique for using public blockchain in such a way that you can not use it as a database, but as a piece of middleware, an integration bus between traditional systems of record. So if you have an SAP system and I have an Oracle app system or JD Edwards or a Microsoft Dynamics system, and we have a PO in common, a purchase order, I know for sure that the record in my database is the same as the record in your database, and everything that we do before and after that in terms of transforming that record or creating new records, et cetera, is done with continuity, with integrity across a workflow, without your system being having control over mine or have access to mine, or my system having access to yours. And that's a neat trick, because we have to stay in sync without having, and any computer scientist will tell you, you have, in order to do that, you have to have some kind of common frame of reference. And we're saying, hey, yeah, the public blockchain, if used correctly, is a pretty good always on state machine that you can't tamper with, and you can't lock you out of valid operations. So it's like the internet of state, or the stateful internet, what we call the mainnet, capital M. So the Baseline protocol is the first official protocol, a project or a standards project, where we're getting everybody to make sure that we're all using 3-pronged plugs and 220 volts so that we can talk to each other, we can work with each other, regardless of what components or systems we're using to baseline. So that's why I usually don't say the word baseline. It sounds like a product or a chain or a token or a scheme or a platform or what have you. It's not. It's just a technique that we all need to do roughly the same way.
Cool.
You should hear SAP or Oracle saying, yes, SAP is now baseline native. Oracle's baseline native, and all that means is they can talk to each other without, according to a pretty easy standard.
Right. So baselining is a verb, basically.
Yeah, we're trying to verb it.
I'm trying to verb it. So you folks recently released version 0.1, and why was that such an important milestone in the project?
It was a huge milestone for two reasons. First was that it is now abstracted to the point where it would be fairly easy for anyone practicing the art of reading and writing code to figure it out and deploy it, activate it, run it, use it, extend it, tinker with it. And before that, it was really a specification in demo form. So there was a set of demo code that needed to be generalized and abstracted. The second reason, and that is now done. It's reasonably well abstracted. It has a core set of interfaces and a growing set of reference implementations of those interfaces. And I should remind me to kind of talk more about that, which I would think that is the kernel of the intersection between open source software projects and open standards.
We're going to get to that. You're leading right into one of my next questions, John. So we're good.
So don't let me forget about, because that's really is the moment of doing that. The fact that we're really defining interfaces in code, which embody the standard, and also inform the standard. So it goes back and forth. So that was why the work on that was important. The second reason it was important is that, unlike things I've done in the past, like Hyperledger Fabric, which I think we launched in December 17th, 2015, and it was crazy getting all those companies together. It was wonderful. Jim Zemlin is super cool. Working with him was fun. And Guy, your opposite number over at Linux Foundation. I'm sure you know him.
No, Jim Long.
Decent guy. So that was fun, but hard. But in that process, we didn't really we didn't go after a standard. And the other thing was, we said, hey, code talks, we're just going to write code. That's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. I like what we're doing with the OASIS foundation, with the OASIS program better, because it's both code and standards. And if you do it right, you don't have to bog either of them down. But I think
so. John, do you just want me to ask you that question? That sounds like you're kind of leading there anyway. Because obviously here at OASIS Open, we're about both open source and open standards. And I know you mentioned you're taking a multiple implementation strategy. How do you think this plays with the future of the specification work you're trying to do?
Well, I think it's laying down a pretty nice pattern, right? You have a core code /code or /core folder, and in that are effectively very abstract interfaces, full of enums and such, right? So it's just very generalized and abstracted. Underneath that, you have baseline reference implementation 1, and there will be 2 and 3 and 4 and 5. And those can be more opinionated. They can say, hey, yeah, we're going to use our stack in this way with these interfaces. Oh, and the way we're using it is informing something new that we should consider as a new interface, and we should write that. That's probably a signal that needs to be also part of the standard. So another folder, docs/standards, that's where all of the writing will go, as far as right. The shalls and musts and chants.
Right. So are you using the interfaces you're defining as sort of the basis, the bones of that standard, if you will?
Yeah, because it's true. I think Jerry Cuomo used to say this very well, CTO at IBM. He used to say, code talks, talk walks. Well, that's true. But code talks, and in some things, if you don't talk about it, it's going to become a mess, right? So you have to have the standards sometimes. I think a lot of people avoid the standards in software because they assume, kind of like government, that it's going to go badly. And what you need is smart government, and you need smart standards development. And I think the smartest way to go is to have the code and all the work should be, whether you're writing in a human language or you're writing in code, you should be doing that, considering that part of the same activity. Which is why the standards leadership, like Anna Frank, who's fantastic, is part of the maintainer's body as well. So we don't distinguish between, whether you're writing standards or you're writing code or you're checking. Both of those things have to be checked in. Yeah. So I think that's a good best practice in software standards.
Interesting. So, I mean, it kind of goes to one of the other questions I wanted to ask you, which is, obviously, if you're using the interfaces kind of as the bones, do you see any other opportunities to meaningfully combine open source and open standards kind of from the community standpoint? I mean, John, I'm a big community guy. And I think I see a lot of times these communities look at each other and go, well, you're slow and you have no governance, right? I mean, we can figure out which one of those it is just by the context, but sort of, how do you think we do a better job of meaningfully combining these communities?
Well, the reason why I'm going to answer two questions in one. I know that somebody was asking, why did we go with OASIS? And I think it's combined answer because we were looking at different ways to do all of this work. And we considered all of the open source foundations, standards bodies going straight with, something like W3C or what have you. And then the Enterprise Ethereum Alliance, or what I think is soon to become the Ethereum Ecosystem Alliance or Association, at least it's a hope I have for the branding. Because Ethereum needs to be all of Ethereum. It's not just enterprises versus everybody else. It's all of Ethereum. Everybody agrees on that, and so I think that'll be a shift. And as that shift comes, we really need to be focused on all Ethereum standards, all. Without bogging down people who really don't want to be talking about standards. I mean, the developers that have been writing Ethereum and making it a de facto standard in many ways within the Ethereum community have done a pretty good job. So we don't want to mess that up. But then if you're a CIO of a company, or if you're in a government agency or what have you, not having that really boring document that really locks down the details of implementation requirements or whatever to be consistent and to have development, have integrity, so that everybody's implementing things in a similar way when that's important. Those are things that you don't want to bog the folks on the Ethereum Foundation or any of the Ethereum community that's writing code for the core. You want them kind of zipping along, but you got to get your ear real close to the ground and know what they're doing, and then house projects that are specific, like Baseline. Socrates would be a good one. Other kinds of projects where you not only do you need to write code, but you need to and implement it. You also need to be able to say everybody's got to, no matter what product you're using, if it's using this standard, we can expect the same things from it.
Right. So do you see kind of a role of a community liaison? What do you see? Where do you see kind of that intersection happening? Do you see it happening kind of at a governance level? Because I think the reason I ask this question is obviously, I have a vested interest in it at OASIS, trying to figure out how we come up with patterns of letting these communities work together. Because you're right, as a former developer, for the longest time before I took this role, I looked at standards and said, oh gosh, that's just too much work, and it's people in back rooms, and it just takes forever. But there's a lot of valid reasons why you need to have those for all the reasons you mentioned. So trying to figure out where we find that good intersection and who performs essentially that translation, if you will, between an open source community and a standards community.
Well, the first part of it, even before you get to that, is dealing with the fact that most standards organizations and some open source organizations are very concerned about, or they don't want, they have it's a members club, right? And the problem with that, with any kind of open thing like the mainnet, is that if you're not going to, you could just be writing words on a page if you're writing standards, and you are not listening to the development community who may not be members of your association, and in listening, also having some ability for them to listen to you. Because they're the ones that are going to write the code. And so you could write, must do this, and they'll never maybe ever read it. Right. Unless so how do you involve non-members of an association in that standards process. And some standards you can't, right? They're the kinds of standards that simply require, or at least will enforce, that only the people that are paid members have any say in the standard. This is not what we're doing. Right? So what we're doing requires having big ears and some heft with the community, and it can't be based on them paying us money. Right. So yeah, it's I think what you guys have figured out better than anybody else is how to more or less run it like PBS, right? In that those of us who can pay do, and those of us who can contribute work do. And as long as we're all signing the ICLA or the ECLA, the licensing agreement, which by the way was excellently implemented by your team, and Jory and folks, Chet, Carol and Jane, everybody. That's a big shift from a lot of some other organizations that we could have gone into, where they would have restricted us, or there would have been big crazy rules about whether or not you could involve any input from the community. We have a completely open community with Baseline. Anybody can contribute, and not only that, but you can't buy your way into a steering committee seat. The only way you get on the committee is by being voted in by people who have done at least one pull request on the repo.
Right. Yeah, no, I like that governance model. And honestly, it's one of the reasons why I was interested in coming to OASIS, is because I did see that. I saw that focus on community, that focus on openness, right? And we're actually referring to ourselves as OASIS Open, which has always been the legal name of the org. And now we're really, I think, putting effort behind that in the brand. So actually, that leads kind of to my next question. You sort of touched on it a little bit, but if you could wave your magic wand and say, hey, OASIS, I'd like OASIS Open, I'd like you to do more of this or less of this to encourage other open projects efforts or even open standards efforts, what would be your advice?
You remember that Saturday Night Live with more cowbell? Right?
More cowbell. Oh, I love
need
that.
More cowbell.
I love that skit. We need more
you need more Jory is what you need.
we need more Jory.
6 more Jories.
Right. And for those that don't know,
not to pander, but I mean, what you need are people that specifically what the attributes of Jory that are really important are. You have somebody who knows how to manage a community, knows how to guide, understands the open source process. I mean, she's even tipped me, on the side, hey, you might want to do more of that. You might want to do less of that. As a new chair, that's fantastic to have that to have somebody, checking your 6.
Right.
Like that. So those are the soft powers. The hard powers are, somebody who actually writes code and can actually do IT at the wires level has saved us over and over again. So Jory's, not simply organizing these communities and setting them up. She actually, is talented, engineer or IT person.
Yeah.
So that's important.
Yeah. And staff knows, and I've said this before, Jory's also a huge reason why I wanted to come to OASIS, because I saw the work she's been doing just in the open source community, and I've known her from there. So Jory, we're giving you 2 thumbs up. Cool. Anything else you think we should be doing?
The other 2 things are, one, what has been astounding is how Carol and team have been able to actually bring in new members who we never would have thought to talk to. Yeah, we assumed going into this that we would have to bring everything, every member, and that it would be our job to convince them or get them involved. Now, Carol's been every bit. I mean, I think we might be 50-50 at this point in terms of the companies that are coming in, not only who are sponsoring, but are just simply, getting involved. We have Google is now there's a Google candidate for the technical steering committee, and Carol was instrumental in making the case for them. We both were. So that was surprising how Accenture's come in as a full sponsor, and that came all from you.
Cool. And by the way, for those who don't know, that's Carol Geyer, our head of business development, who another one of the awesome staff I get to work with. So really excited about that. So John, we're going to kind of wrap up here to leave some room for questions. So kind of one final question I have for you. For those that are interested in baseline and interested in the things you've talked about, how would you suggest that they get involved? What's the best way for them to kind of get into this?
Sure, it's easy. Go to baseline-protocol.org. Click on the Slack channel or Slack inviter. Or if you're a Telegraph person, use that. Jory and one of our team, our community members set up so that if there's a channel in Slack that if you use that, you're getting to every channel that we, whether it's Discord or Telegram, which is pretty cool. And just join the conversation. It's a live conversation. There's about 700 people in there, and they're very friendly. So you can really get involved and talk and go, what do you guys think about this? You can do it right on the general channel. People will answer you. I might. And then there's, so do that, get into the GitHub repo, talk to Carol about sponsoring, that sort of thing. And then most importantly, make it safe for your engineers to contribute, come talk, build a demo. The most important thing for baselining is product teams, like Ernst & Young just announced that their ops chain product is baseline compliant, which makes it the first enterprise-built enterprise product on the baseline protocol. That was great. We need more of that. So engineers doing open source work and product teams leveraging the work.
Yeah, always a good recipe. Awesome. Thanks, John. So at this point, I'm going to turn it over to Dee Schur to moderate any audience questions. We'd love to hear from our listeners.
Hey, great. You guys did a great job. Okay, so can everyone hear me okay?
You're a little echoey, but we can hear you.
Okay.
Yeah, it's almost like you switched mics.
I did not.
There you are.
There you are.
Okay, perfect. Okay, so here's our first question. Excuse me. Are you planning to adopt existing standards under either OASIS or ISO JTC1 or both when it makes sense not to reinvent the wheel?
I've been looking at ISO JTC1. Thank you for talking about that. Guy, I should say one of the things that's great about working in OASIS is that you are a feeder into a variety of termination points, ISO being one of them. And it strikes me that, this is where deduping is always a big problem in standards, right? You say, well, exactly. Deduping is a problem with everything, right? Is there significant overlap? And the fact that we're out there in the community means that somebody can ask that question, so that if I didn't know about that, if I hadn't already had my eyes on that in our team, now we would. So thank you for the question. And I think nobody likes too much redundancy. A little redundancy is okay, but too much is too much. And so if it's completely overlapping standard. That said, I think a lot of times one gets the impression of a overlap that is actually not there. You look at it from another angle and you see that they're not overlapping. So we'll see.
Obviously, like you said, we have great relationships with all of these termination points, and ISO being one of them. And so, obviously, from our side, we want to help however that makes sense for us to be the best help to baseline on other projects. So, cool. Dee, do we have some more questions?
I certainly do. Okay, so what are some of the business use cases Baseline is seeking to target?
Oh, well, that's pretty simple. Remember back in, some folks who remember the 90s will remember that there was a time when everyone needed a website or web page. And then there was a time that everyone needed a spinning logo on the web page. And then there was the catalog. You needed your catalog on the web page. And then you wanted to sell the stuff that's in your catalog on the web page. And then you wanted to connect it to your backends and et cetera. Well, that's not a vertical use case. So I'm not really a use case oriented person these days. Have been in the past. Certainly when I was running a startup, I was very much interested in use cases. But this is more of a horizontal specificity. The specificity is around the horizontal, which is e-commerce, right? So if you need, in this case, it's you might call B-commerce, that it's the pipelines of where companies need to share information that they can verify is identical and that was derived identically, without subjecting themselves to the hegemony of either of any of the participants or some new third, centralized entity. So B2B process automation's rise is what we're really about. It's less about blockchain at all. It's just saying, hey, yeah, there's this mainnet thing that's always on and you can use as a bulletin board. Nothing really to see here, but it means you don't have to stand one up every time you have a new partner or a new group, and spend that $1 million doing that and increase that amount of complexity, because now you're managing all these little silos. You can say, no, we're always using the mainnet for this because we're not leaking any information to the mainnet in doing so. All we're putting there are proofs of consistency and continuity in an interesting way. And we can go into details on that. So I think, have I answered your question? Have I answered the question? Or
I think so. Okay, we've got a few more very specific ones. I'm going to try and run through them quickly, and folks feel free to drop off whenever you'd like, but I'm going to go ahead and continue with the questions. We've got good ones. Okay, Baseline and Ethereum chain you work with both describe themselves as enterprise level technology. Okay, what does that mean other than we have some big users?
It means that unlike a lot of new early stage blockchain projects where you said, well, let's get this whole new stack. This effectively, 5 years we've been treating blockchains as databases. We said, they're and the pointy head managers will say they are safer databases. They're not. They're actually less safe databases, because now administrators, if you're doing it correctly and you're doing it actually in a way that requires a blockchain in any way, you have different administrators in different companies with different security protocols. And while that may make the data harder to tamper with, not impossible because companies do collude, but harder, you've made it that many times less or more likely to have somebody get hacked and your data to be out. So data breaches are what most CEOs worry about. And blockchains are terrible for that particular issue. Don't put data on blockchains, any kind of blockchain, private or public. And so where's the work being done? In SAP, which is an enterprise grade production system, in Oracle, in Dynamics, in your Mongo database, and even in your spreadsheet, where those are appropriate. Neo4j, any kind of data system, DBMS, is where the work is getting done. And then we're putting a little bit of standardized glue on the outside that, with a CRUD access that says, okay, I'm going to process this in such a way that when we send this record to these other guys, we're going to also record a proof that they received it, that they processed it consistently and digitally signed, so that we have not only proof of existence, but now we have effectively a fancy hash or a proof of consistency. And so that, and doing all of that, as long as you use enterprise components, things like NATs for your messaging layer or what have you, where you are keeping your data at rest is all GDPR compliant and under good controls, which you're already doing if you're a good enterprise, then baselining is enterprise ready, because most of the pieces, all the pieces are in the enterprise stack.
Okay,
the only
great.
new thing is that we're using that public blockchain as a way to prove consistency to each other without exposing any details about our relationship or our patterns of business.
Okay, we're kind of at the bottom of the hour, but I do have one question I think is a really good last question to ask. Excuse me. Are there any next major steps or milestones you guys are working towards?
Oh, well, yes. Right now, there are a number of feature and function and performance or non-functional requirement initiatives, increasing the scale. We can do about several million baseline events, confirmations on chain in a month. That's going to get us well into 2021. And then with ETH2, that should bring it up another 100x. But also we have batching and some other mutex type stuff that we can work on that will bring that up another 100x. And then you're getting into basically an entire industry could be doing baselining on a good chunk of their, most or all of their business to business events, with baselining globally. So getting to scale is good. And then there are all sorts of really cool projects. There's one where you just get a DocuSign and you click on that, you get to baseline that record into your system, or you could create imagine somebody saying, for $9.95 a month, here's your instant baselined system of record that your wholesaler is going to feel a lot better about you now, maybe even give you discounts because they know that you're keeping records that are consistent with theirs, just from a DocuSign.
Yeah, no, tons of opportunity, John. Really, really appreciate you being on. Thanks, John. This has been fantastic. And I know when I first joined OASIS Open, baseline was one of the things that I first saw, and it was called out as a great example of the power of the Open Projects Initiative that we've put out there. And I know we're all incredibly thankful for your encouragement and support and everything you've done. So thanks everybody out there for joining us. Until next time, thanks for listening.